Hey everybody, tonight's video is called God is in the Storm, and tonight we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Job, chapter 37. We're going to look at Elihu saying that God is in the storm. And I know many times we hear God is in the storm, speaking about the problems of life or the trials of life, but he's going to be speaking about it using meteorological terms. And some of the terms he's going to use here is going to upset some people tonight, and you'll probably know why as we go through. But chapter 37, verse 1 through 5. And have you ever thought when you're getting either a thunderstorm, a snowstorm, blizzard, hurricane, whatever, have you ever thought that God is still in that storm? So chapter 37, verse 1 through 5, it says, "At this also my heart trembles and leaps from its place. Hear attentively the thunder of his voice and the rumbling that comes from his mouth. He sends it forth under the whole heaven, and lightning to the ends of the earth. After it a voice roars. He thunders with his majestic voice, and he does not restrain them when his voice is heard. God thunders marvelously with his voice. He does great things which we cannot comprehend." So Elihu, he is affected by the magnificence of the thunderstorm, and he felt that Job needed a dose of the greatness of God. In the Bible, it contains some pretty magnificent descriptions of thunderstorms, such as Psalm 29, if you would like to check that out on your own. And in verse 5, he does great things which we cannot comprehend. We would have to agree, if you are a believer, that is a great statement that was made by Elihu that we should all agree upon. And thunderstorms, just speaking on a personal level, I like watching thunderstorms. Like, there's nothing like a summer night, not so, necessarily a severe thunderstorm that's going to knock out power or knock down trees. But, a thunderstorm when you see the sky on a dark night and it lights up in the middle of July. Like, it's just beautiful to me. In verse 6 through 13, we're going to talk about something not so beautiful to me. It says, "For he says to the snow, fall on the earth. Likewise to the gentle rain and the heavy rain of his strength. He seals the hand of every man, that all men may know his work. The beasts go in dens and remain in their lairs." I feel hurt that he calls me a beast, because I go into my den during snowstorms if I can. Verse 9, it says, "From the chamber of the south comes the whirlwind, and cold from the scattering winds of the north. By the breath of God ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen. Also the moisture he saturates, the thick clouds, he scatters his bright clouds. And they swirl about, being turned by his guidance, that they may do whatever he commands them on the face of the earth, whole earth. He causes it to come, whether for correction, or for his land, or for mercy." So Elihu, he describes God's power expressed in the cold winter. And the storms and the hard winters remind us of a world in which harsh things occur, but for God's purposes of either correction or mercy. And some will argue that Elihu had storms of life in mind as well when he's speaking on correction. And I know snow, verse 6 here, is not what many of us want to hear up in New England. While I'm not recording in the storm, this video is likely being released during a snowstorm. We're looking up to a foot of snow where I live. And it is God who commands the snow, gentle rain, heavy rain, and including freezing rain. And God's breath makes ice and freezes the broad waters when God sends the cold and snow. And when God sends the cold and snow, the farmers cannot do their work. And I know, yes, today we live in an age where we have a lot of man-made technology, but farmers aren't as prosperous in the wintertime. And their hands are sealed from further effort and time away from work. And it should make them reflect on the work of God. You see, if you live up here in New England, when you get a snow day, if you don't have to go to work or you're stuck home with the kids from school, make it a day that you reflect on God. And to Elihu, the weather in all its glory is the glory of God, and God stops people from their work so that they can see it. And, you know, schools are going to be canceled. I don't know if this video will be either posted Monday or Tuesday this week, but I wanted to get this up before the storm. Elihu wanted Job to not only appreciate the greatness of God, but also the submission of creation. And the implication is that the unrepentant Job should submit to the God who has all his ways in creation. In verse 14 through 18, it says, "Listen to this, O Job. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. Do you know when God dispatches them and causes the light of his cloud to shine? Do you know how the clouds are balanced? Those wondrous works of him who are perfect in knowledge? Why are your garments hot? When he quiets the earth by the south wind, with him have you spread out the skies, strong as cast metal mirror? Teach us what we should say to him. For we prepare nothing because of the darkness. Should he be told that I wish to speak? If a man were to speak, surely he would be swallowed up. Even now, men cannot look at light when it is bright in the skies, when the wind has passed and cleared them." So I did read a little bit further than I intended to here, so I'm going to keep going and finish the verses and comment on it. He comes from the north as golden splendor, with God as awesome majesty. As for the Almighty, we cannot find him. He is excellent in power, in judgment, and abundant justice. He does not oppress, therefore men fear him. He shows no partiality to any who are wise of heart. So in verses 14 through 18, he gives us word pictures of the scene of the sky when the storms and the winters have passed, and the sunlight breaks through, and the warm wind blows, and the sky clears. You know, so he's speaking almost kind of what we would call a time of spring. And believe me, I look forward to spring. Winter is not my favorite thing. I love spring when it starts getting warmer, the nights get out, you know, sunsets are later, sunrises are earlier, and it's not, you know, 100 degrees and humidity. Like springtime and fall time are my favorite seasons of the year. And in verse 19 through 24, Elihu reminds Job that since man cannot explain the wonders of God's power and purpose, he ought to be silent and to not contend with God. And what a man has to say against God's plans isn't worthy to utter, and it could bring judgment upon them. And Elihu is illustrating the folly of telling God what to do by describing staring into the golden sun on a brilliant day. And we cannot confront God in his great glory. We aren't even able to look at the sun he created. You might say, well, I can put on some sunglasses and look straight up directly in the sun rays. I still don't recommend that. And probably your eye doctor wouldn't either. And God is the righteous judge who will not take a bribe or perform favors in judgment. And therefore, in Elihu's concluding speech in verses 19 through 24, he pointed out to Job and the reader on God, to God, who was ready at last to speak, as we're going to see in our next chapter. So we see Elihu's come to an end in his speech here. He concludes his words anticipating the God of that in the heavens. And so tonight we look at Elihu seeing God in the storm, and we see Elihu describe many different things. We see him describe God in the thunderstorms, the voice of God as thunder. And, you know, it just reminds me, I was going to make a commentary on that separate. It reminds me of, as a child growing up, you probably heard people come up with these crazy stories, you know, when it was a thunderstorm. Maybe it was your grandparents who would tell you, because that was, you know, one of my faint memories was my mom, but mostly my grandparents, that when it's a thunderstorm and it's lightning and God's flickering lights, and when it's thunder, God's rolling a bowling ball. I don't know if you ever heard that. You can comment in the video comments, but it just amazes me, the stories, like even from a non-Christian basis. The voice of God can be compared to thunder. But verse 6 through 13, it says what the voice of God can do. God can command the snow to come down. And God is commanding the snow to fall on New England, whether we want it or not this week. In verse 14 through 18, we see that Elihu gives Job the advice that he doesn't know as much as he thought he did. And we see that the chapter ends with Elihu calling Job to fear God instead of trying to speak to him. So we'll see you next as we're going to look at God speaking to Job for the next few chapters. And I hope you have a great rest of your evening. As I mentioned on Sunday's video, we will let you know when the next video will be, depending on health and all that. So God bless. Have a great evening. New Englanders, stay safe, make smart choices. God bless.